In the small, quiet town of Anderson, Indiana, life moved at a peaceful pace. People went about their daily routines, families raised their children, and loved ones gathered together. Among them was Michela Hinston, a 47-year-old woman who worked tirelessly as a bus driver for the Anderson schools and the City of Anderson transit system. For years, she dedicated her time to making ends meet, often putting in long hours to provide for her family. She was a devoted mother and a woman who loved her job, always with a smile for the passengers she picked up each day. But one fateful day in June 2024, the world would change. That day, Michela Hinston was no longer out driving her bus, transporting the community she loved. The car she had spent countless hours in serving her town sat empty in the parking lot of Forrestville Cemetery, but it would never carry her again. She would never return to it. Her estranged husband, Jeremy Hinston, 49, had taken her life in a calculated act of violence, ending her days in an instant. On June 26, 2024, officers arrived at Forrestville Cemetery in Elwood, Indiana, after receiving a 911 call from a concerned witness. The caller had spotted a man and a woman in a Jeep Grand Cherokee, both unresponsive when the witness knocked on the window. The woman, later identified as Michela Hinston, was slumped in the driver's seat. The man sitting beside her, Jeremy Hinston, appeared unresponsive at first, but when officers knocked, he unlocked the car and climbed out. The sight that greeted them was horrific. Michela, mother of two, was dead, the victim of multiple gunshot wounds. Her husband, Jeremy, was covered in blood, the evidence of his chilling act still fresh on his clothes. How does a man who once vowed to love and cherish his wife end up sitting next to her lifeless body in their vehicle, parked in a cemetery? What turns love into such cold, calculated violence? And more importantly, what drove Jeremy Hinston to the point of ending the life of the woman who had once been his partner, his wife, the mother of his children? How did Michela's seemingly normal day end with her life being stolen in an act of brutal violence? The chilling reality of the situation begins to unfold in the most unexpected of ways. From Jeremy's earlier threats to the troubling behavior he exhibited in the days leading up to the murder, the signs were there, though they may have been ignored, overlooked, or simply dismissed by those closest to him. But at what point did Jeremy Hinston cross the line, deciding that he would be the one to decide Michela's fate? In the minutes leading up to the crime, Jeremy Hinston went from a husband desperate to hold on to the life he once shared with his wife to a man who would fatally shoot her in cold blood. What went through Jeremy's mind as he pulled that trigger? Was there a moment when he realized what he was about to do, or had he already made the decision to end her life before the day even began? Michela Hinston's story isn't just one of a woman's tragic death. It's a story of a relationship that was once filled with love, now tainted by obsession, resentment, and control. Jeremy Hinston's actions didn't come out of nowhere. They were the culmination of months, maybe years, of unresolved anger and psychological strain. But how did it all build to the point where Michela's life was no longer worth living in the eyes of Jeremy? What motivated him to destroy the life they once built together? The chilling confession would later echo through the courtroom: "I wasn't thinking right." Was it really a momentary lapse of reason, or did Jeremy Hinston intentionally seek to take Michela's life? And if so, how far had he planned this tragic event? Tonight, we examine Jeremy Hinston's disturbing story, tracing his violent journey from jealous spouse to cold-blooded murderer. We'll look at the signs that were missed, the moments where intervention could have prevented this, and how the system failed Michela Hinston despite her efforts to protect herself. Tonight, we examine the actions, warning signs, and signals that would appear yet anyone would see but wouldn't be triggered. We will trace the investigation, understanding the Jeremy Hinston story to recognize the pattern before someone else's life is cut short in similar circumstances. I question you, my audience. Have you ever witnessed conversations that would transform into violence, something dangerous that happened to a friend, or maybe experienced it yourself? If you believe this story deserves to be told with purpose, not just for shock value but as a lesson for us, I hope you'll join our Bruised Voice community by subscribing. Your engagement helps us continue examining these crucial cases with the care that they deserve. Leave a comment below, sharing any warning signs you've witnessed in your own interactions or relationships. Your insight might be what someone else needs to hear today. Michela Hinston was a woman who lived and breathed kindness. At 47 years old, she had devoted her life to raising her children, serving her community, and working relentlessly to support her family. A beloved mother, a devoted wife, and a hardworking bus driver, Michela was no stranger to the challenges of life, yet her heart remained open, her spirit unbroken. Growing up, Michela was the daughter of two hardworking individuals who taught her the value of perseverance, humility, and compassion. Her parents were the backbone of the family, working long hours to provide for their children. Michela absorbed those lessons deeply, channeling that same sense of dedication into everything she did. From a young age, she understood the importance of community, of being there for those who needed help, of offering a hand to those in need. Neighbors remember her fondly as a natural protector. When other children were being bullied, it was Michela who stood up, defending them when no one else would. She didn't need to be asked. It was simply in her nature to shield the vulnerable, to be a source of comfort to those around her. Michela's kind heart didn't stop with children. She extended that same care to everyone she encountered. She was known for her ability to listen, her ability to make others feel heard and valued. Even the most temperamental passengers on her bus route, people who might have been abrasive with others, softened when they interacted with her. She was that rare kind of person who didn't just do her job, she brought warmth to it. As a bus driver for the Anderson schools and the City of Anderson transit system, Michela was an integral part of her community. She knew many of the children by name and her passengers respected her. In fact, many of her passengers would rate her service with 5 stars, not because she was just a driver but because she made their day better. She took pride in her work, and it showed in her every action. Michela was known for her punctuality, her friendly nature, and the ease she brought to every ride. She was dependable, a steady presence in the lives of so many people. But despite the outward appearance of a happy, hardworking mother, there were dark clouds gathering at home. Michela's relationship with her husband, Jeremy Hinston, started off like many others. It was filled with excitement, love, and promises of forever. They built a life together, and for a time, it seemed like their love was the glue that held everything together. Jeremy was known as passionate, a man with ambition. They bought a house together, started their family, and celebrated the highs of life. But over time, something changed. Jeremy, once a loving partner, began to show signs of possessiveness. His charm faded, replaced by control. As their relationship progressed, the cracks began to show. At first, the signs were subtle. A jealous glance here, a comment there about her appearance, about how she dressed. But as time went on, Jeremy's controlling tendencies grew stronger. Michela began making excuses for him. She would tell friends and family that he was just stressed, that it was just a phase. But those close to her could see it. They noticed how Jeremy would show up uninvited at her workplace, peering through windows when he had no reason to be there. It was clear that his behavior was becoming more erratic, more aggressive, and more controlling. Over the years, Jeremy's behavior escalated. He began to criticize Michela's appearance more frequently, even going so far as to say that her clothing was too revealing for someone in her profession. He didn't want her to be seen by others as attractive, as desirable. He insisted that she change her wardrobe, wear more conservative clothing. He monitored the money she spent, questioned her every move. But what began as criticism turned into emotional abuse. Jeremy wanted to control every aspect of Michela's life, from her wardrobe to her daily schedule. He started questioning her about where she had been, what she had done. He became possessive, demanding to know every detail of her day. Michela was trapped. She felt like she couldn't leave, but she also knew that something was terribly wrong. There were arguments, physical confrontations, and moments of intense tension. Neighbors would later recall hearing shouting coming from the Hinston home, arguments that would often escalate into violence. Michela's relationship with her husband, Jeremy Hinston, started off like many others. It was filled with excitement, love, and promises of forever. They built a life together, and for a time, it seemed like their love was the glue that held everything together. Jeremy was known as passionate, a man with ambition. They bought a house together, started their family, and celebrated the highs of life. But over time, something changed. Jeremy, once a loving partner, began to show signs of possessiveness. His charm faded, replaced by control. As their relationship progressed, the cracks began to show. At first, the signs were subtle. A jealous glance here, a comment there about her appearance, about how she dressed. But as time went on, Jeremy's controlling tendencies grew stronger. Michela began making excuses for him. She would tell friends and family that he was just stressed, that it was just a phase. But those close to her could see it. They noticed how Jeremy would show up uninvited at her workplace, peering through windows when he had no reason to be there. It was clear that his behavior was becoming more erratic, more aggressive, and more controlling. Over the years, Jeremy's behavior escalated. He began to criticize Michela's appearance more frequently, even going so far as to say that her clothing was too revealing for someone in her profession. He didn't want her to be seen by others as attractive, as desirable. He insisted that she change her wardrobe, wear more conservative clothing. He monitored the money she spent, questioned her every move. But what began as criticism turned into emotional abuse. Jeremy wanted to control every aspect of Michela's life, from her wardrobe to her daily schedule. He started questioning her about where she had been, what she had done. He became possessive, demanding to know every detail of her day. Michela was trapped. She felt like she couldn't leave, but she also knew that something was terribly wrong. There were arguments, physical confrontations, and moments of intense tension. Neighbors would later recall hearing shouting coming from the Hinston home, arguments that would often escalate into violence. At one point, Jeremy physically attacked Michela. He struck her with a closed fist on the head, leaving her bruised and shaken. This wasn't the first instance of physical violence. Jeremy had already shown signs of aggression, but this time, it was more than just a fight. It was a warning that things had gone too far. Michela, as resilient as she was, tried to make excuses for him. She tried to convince herself that he was just having a hard time, that he would get better. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep living like this. The fear, the anxiety, and the control were suffocating her. She filed for a restraining order against Jeremy, seeking protection not just for herself, but for her children. This act, however, didn't bring the relief she had hoped for. If anything, it seemed to escalate the tension. Jeremy was angry. He wasn't going to let go of control so easily. He began to show up unannounced at her workplace, causing scenes and making her feel unsafe. But despite the fears she was living with, Michela refused to give up. She tried to shield her children from the violence, hoping they would never know the extent of the danger she was in. She continued to go to work, continued to provide for her children, and continued to care for those around her. However, no matter how much she tried to maintain normalcy, she knew something was deeply wrong. Her relationship with Jeremy had shifted from something built on love and respect to something twisted and toxic. If you've seen signs like this before in a relationship, or maybe even in your own life, it's time to speak up. Have you noticed any red flags that seemed harmless at first but grew into something more dangerous? Leave a comment below sharing what you've witnessed or experienced. It could help someone else identify a dangerous pattern in their own relationships. Hit the like button if you believe we need more open conversation about relationships and the warning signs we must never ignore. Subscribe to Bruised Voice, where we value the difficult but necessary conversations surrounding these issues. It seemed like any other evening when Michela and Jeremy were left alone in their home. The children were away, staying with their grandmother, and the house was eerily quiet. For most couples, this might be a time to reconnect, to share a peaceful evening. But for Jeremy and Michela, this was the calm before the storm. Beneath the surface of their seemingly normal life, there were cracks, deep, dangerous cracks. Jeremy had a history of violent outbursts. Family and friends who were close to Michela began to see the changes in him, even if they couldn't pinpoint exactly when it all started to go wrong. His temper had always been quick, but now it was like a fuse on a bomb ready to blow. Michela had reached out to authorities in the past, trying to report his behavior, but she had always second-guessed whether her words would actually make a difference. Michela had shared her growing fear with a close friend. She had confided that Jeremy's behavior had grown more erratic, his paranoia increasing day by day. His jealousy, his anger, it was all reaching a breaking point. But there was no escaping it. He had already started to take control in other ways. He was monitoring her phone, controlling where she went, who she talked to, and what she did. Every day, she felt like she was walking on eggshells, afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing something that might set him off. The fear was palpable. In a chilling moment of clarity, Michela had written down her fears. She had gone to court in an attempt to file a restraining order against Jeremy, citing his violent history and threats against her. Yet, despite the obvious signs of abuse, the system had failed her. No one had acted quickly enough to protect her, and now she was paying the price. The night before the murder, she had reached out to a family advocate, asking for help. Her words were heavy with fear. "I just can't do this anymore," she had said. But even though she was trying to protect herself, there was still one thing she couldn't control: Jeremy. He had been drinking heavily that day, his anger simmering. Everyone around him, his family, his friends, could see it. But no one knew how bad it was, how close they were to the breaking point. Jeremy had spent the day brooding, consumed by thoughts of betrayal, fear, and frustration. Had he been thinking about this moment for weeks, months, or did something trigger him in those final hours? On June 26th, the day of the crime, everything seemed normal. Michela left for work that afternoon with the usual smiles and farewells. No one suspected anything out of the ordinary. Jeremy had acted strange, yes, but nothing outwardly alarming. Was this the day he had been waiting for? The day he could no longer hide his rage? Or had he been planning this all along, knowing that this was the only way he could regain control? Neighbors later reported hearing nothing unusual, just the typical sounds of suburban life. But little did they know, a deadly storm was brewing just inside the home. Michela had spoken to her sister earlier that day. She mentioned the same fears she had shared with others. "It's like walking on eggshells," she said. "He's always watching me. I don't know how much more I can take." She had even gone so far as to confide that Jeremy had been making threats, not just to her but also to the children. He had been telling people that he didn't know how much longer he could keep it together. But Michela, always the one to carry the weight of the world, tried to keep it together for her children. She didn't want to show weakness, especially not in front of her kids. But that night was different. Jeremy had already planned it, and Michela, no matter how hard she tried to protect herself, couldn't avoid the inevitable. As she drove home from work, little did she know that Jeremy had already decided how the night would end. But what had really triggered his action? Was it something she had done? Or was it the culmination of months, maybe even years, of tension, violence, and control? Around 8:30 p.m., on that fateful June 26th evening, Jeremy and Michela drove to Forrestville Cemetery in their Jeep Grand Cherokee. The chilling thought now, Was Michela coerced into driving there? Or did she feel like she had no choice? The darkness of the cemetery, isolated and empty, must have seemed like the perfect place for Jeremy to carry out his plan. And in the cold silence of that place, away from prying eyes, he carried out his crime. In the cramped interior of the Jeep, Jeremy shot Michela at close range. 7 shots to her chest and abdomen, each shot more brutal than the last. Close-range execution. Michela was a loving mother, dedicated to her work, to her children, but now she lay lifeless in the driver's seat, blood staining the upholstery. Jeremy didn't flee immediately. Instead, he sat there with her, next to her body. How long did he sit there, staring at her? Did he feel remorse, or was it just cold indifference? Was he reflecting on the moment of the kill, or was he calculating his next move? What went through his mind as he sat next to her? Was it guilt? Remorse? Or was it just a dark sense of finality, like he had finally regained control, the only way he knew how? His 2 sons at this moment were likely unaware of what had just happened. What did they think, seeing their father, their protector, as the man who just murdered their mother? Would they ever be able to make sense of this? How would they cope, knowing their father had killed their mother in cold blood? The whole time, Jeremy stayed with her, waiting for police to arrive. The man who had once sworn to love and protect her was now the one who took her life. Was it guilt, or was it just something more terrifying, an eerie calmness? When the police arrived at the scene, they found Jeremy sitting in the passenger seat of the Jeep, next to Michela's lifeless body. He was unresponsive at first, but once the police knocked on the window, he unlocked the car and stepped out. Blood splattered all over him, from his forehead to his ankles. When the police searched him, they found a handgun in a holster on his waistband, and a magazine in his pocket. Everything pointed to Jeremy as the perpetrator. But what was his state of mind? Was he drunk? Or simply cold-hearted? Jeremy was taken to the hospital for observation, potentially due to a drug overdose. But it wasn't the drugs or alcohol that had led to the murder, it was his own choices, his own descent into violence. As authorities began to piece together the evidence, it became clear that Jeremy had been planning this for some time. His violent tendencies, his erratic behavior, the warning signs, all of it had led to this moment. What was left to piece together was what, exactly, had triggered him to kill. Was it jealousy? Anger? A need to control? Would she be alive today if anyone has done anything about it? Comment below the signal on when to alert authorities about threats. Would she be alive today if anyone had done anything about the signs? Comment below if you've ever witnessed behavior like this. When do you think authorities should have been alerted? What could have been done to stop this tragedy before it happened? The call came in just after 3 p.m. on June 26, 2024. A witness had reported a suspicious vehicle parked at the back of Forrestville Cemetery in Elwood, Indiana. It wasn't an unusual place for a car to be parked, but something about the situation didn't feel right. The witness noticed 2 people inside the vehicle, 1 man and 1 woman, but they appeared unresponsive when the witness knocked on the window. With growing concern, the witness immediately dialed 911. When the police arrived at the cemetery, what they discovered would haunt them for days. Inside a 2019 Jeep Grand Cherokee, they found Michela Hinston slumped in the driver's seat, lifeless, blood staining her chest and abdomen. She had been shot multiple times, at close range, her body slumped forward, frozen in the moment of her final breath. But it wasn't just Michela's body that caught their attention. Sitting beside her in the passenger seat was Jeremy Hinston, her husband, the man who had supposedly shared a life with her. His behavior was odd, almost too calm, too indifferent for someone whose wife lay dead beside him. He didn't panic. He didn't run. Instead, he simply unlocked the door when the police knocked, got out, and calmly stated, "I killed her." The chilling nature of his words sent shivers through the officers, and his next statement was even more unsettling. He invoked the children, his own sons, saying, "I feel most bad for the boys." A confession like that, wrapped in such a chillingly casual tone, would shake anyone to their core. The authorities were left stunned by this, but it was the way Jeremy presented himself that seemed to haunt the investigators. There was no remorse, no visible guilt. Instead, there was an eerie calmness, as though his actions had been justified in his mind. Was this truly a man who had lost control, or had something much darker been at play? As the police began securing the scene, they found what they expected but hoped they wouldn't. Shell casings littered the floor of the vehicle, an undeniable sign that this was not a spur-of-the-moment act, but something far more calculated. They also recovered the firearm, a handgun registered to Jeremy, which had been used to shoot his wife at close range. Jeremy's clothing was drenched in blood. It was clear that he had been close to his wife when the shots were fired. Investigators noted blood splattered on his forehead, his eyelids, his arms and hands, everywhere. They questioned if this was the result of a struggle, or if the scene was simply a brutal execution carried out without hesitation. But the timeline of events began to take shape. If Michela had had the chance to call for help, it could have changed everything. Police later discovered her phone was missing. Had she managed to dial 911 in her final moments, only to be silenced by the shots? Was there any evidence of a struggle before she was murdered? These were questions the investigators now had to answer, and they had no easy path ahead. The ballistic report provided a chilling insight into the weapon used and the trajectory of the bullets, but it also painted a clearer picture of the horrific reality. 7 shots had been fired, each one methodical. It seemed Jeremy didn't want to leave anything to chance. As for Jeremy, his phone records revealed disturbing patterns. Investigators found that his internet search history was filled with disturbing terms and questions about domestic violence, ways to end a marriage, and legal ramifications. These searches didn't align with someone who was mentally unstable, as he would later claim in his defense. They were the actions of a man who had been planning his crime, carefully laying out his intentions, and preparing for the inevitable outcome. But what the detectives found next was even more shocking. While investigating the crime scene, they discovered traces of Jeremy's actions that painted a chilling picture of premeditation. The evidence suggested that this was not an impulsive crime. It was deliberate, planned in cold detail. Jeremy's chilling confession left investigators questioning the true nature of the murder. Was he simply trying to alleviate his guilt by invoking his children? Or was he attempting to manipulate the narrative to gain sympathy? His calm demeanor while sitting next to Michela's body made one thing clear. He didn't seem to feel remorse. And then, as the investigators continued to piece together the timeline, they uncovered even more unsettling details about Jeremy's past. His relationship with Michela had been marred by violence, and the previous threats he had made to her became more than just empty words. They were warnings that had been ignored. But could this tragedy have been prevented if someone had acted sooner? The investigation now had more questions than answers. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but the true motives behind Jeremy's actions were still shrouded in mystery. Was he motivated by anger, jealousy, or something deeper, something far more terrifying? But the biggest question lingered in the air. What would have happened if someone had stepped in sooner? Could this crime have been avoided, or was it only a matter of time before tragedy struck? The investigation into Jeremy Hinston's brutal act had only just begun, but the answers they were uncovering were more chilling than anyone had anticipated. The moment that Jeremy Hinston unlocked the door of the SUV and stepped out to face the police, he knew the game was up. The confession, chilling in its simplicity, was just the beginning. The officers at the scene could not have been prepared for the stark, emotionless tone in which Jeremy admitted to murdering his wife, Michela. The officers quickly secured the area, ensuring that Jeremy could not escape, and began processing the scene for evidence. Michela's lifeless body remained in the driver's seat of the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Her blood was still fresh, staining the interior of the vehicle, and the shell casings were still scattered on the floor, clear signs of a brutal execution-style shooting. But while the evidence was damning, there was something deeply unsettling about Jeremy's behavior. He didn't appear remorseful, nor did he seem to care much about the consequences of his actions. There was a coldness in his demeanor, almost as if he had been expecting this moment to come. When officers approached him, he didn't resist arrest. His confession was so matter-of-fact, so devoid of emotional weight, that it sent chills through everyone present. Jeremy was arrested without incident, and he was taken to a local hospital for observation, where he claimed to have overdosed before the killing, though this claim seemed more like an excuse than a legitimate concern. Despite his claim of intoxication, the evidence spoke for itself. A gun registered to him was found in the vehicle, and his blood-spattered clothing left no doubt as to his involvement. But what led Jeremy to this moment? Was it really just a snap decision, or was there something deeper at play? The court proceedings would soon begin, and the answers might be more complex than anyone could have imagined. The trial began months after Jeremy's arrest, but the drama in the courtroom would be felt for years to come. Jeremy Hinston, now in his 40s, sat at the defendant's table, his face stoic and emotionless. His legal team was prepared to argue that his actions were a result of mental illness, specifically untreated schizophrenia, which Jeremy had been diagnosed with years earlier. They argued that his state of mind in the moments leading up to the murder was heavily influenced by his psychological condition, which had been exacerbated by his refusal to seek consistent treatment. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the defense was going to center on Jeremy's mental state. But for the prosecution, this case was about more than just mental illness. It was about the years of abuse Michela had endured at his hands. Michela's family members took the stand and recounted the years of violence and threats that had haunted her relationship with Jeremy. Friends, too, testified about the increasing tension between the couple, and how it became apparent to those around them that Jeremy's behavior was becoming more erratic and unpredictable. One of the most compelling pieces of testimony came from Jeremy's own family. A relative described how Jeremy had once confessed that he had contemplated murder, but never acted on it, until that fateful day in the cemetery. This chilling admission added another layer to the already disturbing picture of his mental state. The prosecution's argument was clear. Jeremy had murdered his wife in cold blood, and his claims of mental illness were a way to avoid taking full responsibility for his actions. They painted a picture of a man who had long been violent and abusive, and who had finally reached a breaking point. But was this truly a case of a man who lost control, or was it the result of long-standing patterns of abuse that no one had acted on in time? In the courtroom, the evidence continued to stack up against Jeremy. The prosecution presented the autopsy report, which showed that Michela had been shot 7 times at close range, each bullet hitting her in the chest and abdomen. The number of shots, the close proximity, and the sheer brutality of the act left little room for doubt about the intent behind the crime. One of the most striking pieces of evidence was the surveillance footage from the cemetery, which showed the Jeep parked in the same spot for an extended period of time. The footage confirmed that Jeremy had remained in the car with Michela's body for hours after the shooting. It was as if he had no urgency to flee or escape. The investigators also presented phone records, showing that Jeremy had called a family member shortly after the murder, where he made the chilling confession about killing Michela. But what stood out in his statement was how he invoked the children. "I feel most bad for the boys," he said, as if the lives of his 2 sons were somehow the true victims in all of this. The lack of remorse, the way he seemed to shift the blame onto his children, only added to the unsettling nature of his behavior. The trial took a dramatic turn when an expert witness, one of the country's leading psychologists specializing in domestic violence and mental illness, took the stand. The expert explained Jeremy's history of untreated schizophrenia and how it might have influenced his decision-making on the day of the murder. Could a diagnosis like this have been the tipping point for Jeremy? Or was this an excuse to avoid facing the consequences of his actions? As the expert testified, the courtroom grew quiet. The defense team had made their case. Jeremy had lost touch with reality, and in that moment of confusion and anger, he had killed his wife. But was this really the case, or was it just another part of the story Jeremy wanted to tell in order to avoid heavy sentence? The prosecution was determined to show that Jeremy's actions were not a result of mental illness but rather a culmination of years of abusive behavior and simmering resentment. But the questions remained. Was this a tragic act of domestic violence or a man driven mad by his own demons? The jury was about to find out. As the trial reached its conclusion, the weight of Jeremy Hinston's actions hung heavily in the air. After weeks of intense legal battles, expert testimonies, and heart-wrenching testimonies from Michela's family, the moment of truth arrived. The jury had deliberated, and the fate of Jeremy Hinston, who had murdered his wife, Michela, in cold blood, was now in the hands of Judge David Happ. The courtroom was filled with tension as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. Michela's family, friends, and even the prosecutors had spent weeks fighting for justice for the victim. The emotional toll of the trial was evident in every eye in the room, as people awaited the judgment that would set the course for Jeremy's future, and in many ways the future of the 2 sons who had been left behind in the wake of their mother's tragic death. On September 23, 2025, Judge Happ took the stand and began the long-awaited process of delivering the sentence. "Jeremy Hinston," the judge began, "you've taken the life of a woman who had dedicated herself to her family, a woman who loved and protected her children. You did so in the most brutal and senseless manner, taking her life in cold blood and then sitting beside her as if nothing was wrong." The words stung. For those in the room, it was a moment of reckoning, a moment where the horror of what Jeremy had done was finally given the weight it deserved. The courtroom was silent as Judge Happ continued to speak, his voice steady but firm. "Given the severity of the crime," the judge continued, "and the cold-blooded nature of your actions, the court has no choice but to sentence you to 55 years for the murder of your wife, Michela Hinston." A murmur swept through the courtroom at the mention of Michela's name, as those present reflected on the woman she had been. A mother, a friend, a bus driver who had lived a life filled with kindness and love, only to have it ended by the man she trusted most. But the sentence did not end there. "Furthermore, you will serve an additional 20 years for the felony firearm enhancement," Judge Happ said. "Your actions, your choices, led to the loss of a life and the suffering of 2 innocent children. This court has no choice but to ensure you never again have the chance to harm anyone." The words struck Jeremy Hinston as if they were a physical blow. His face, previously emotionless throughout much of the trial, now showed a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps, or the realization that his life would be defined by the one moment of horror he had inflicted on the woman who had loved him. As the sentence was handed down, the room fell into a tense silence. The weight of justice had been delivered, but the emotional scars were just beginning to form. Michela's family, while grateful for the conviction, were left with the reality that no amount of time would bring back the woman they had lost. And for Jeremy's children, the future remained uncertain. Would they ever find a way to move forward after the trauma of losing their mother and having a father who had murdered her? As the sentence was read, Jeremy Hinston stood in the courtroom, his head hanging low. His face, which had shown little emotion throughout the trial, now seemed to show the first signs of vulnerability. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the sentence had finally hit him. Jeremy was led away by the officers, and as he was escorted out of the courtroom, he could be heard muttering, "I wasn't thinking right." It was the same excuse he had offered during his confession to a family member earlier in the trial. "I don't know what happened to make me do that, but tell them I love them." But even as Jeremy expressed these hollow words, it was clear that the reality of his actions had set in. The court was silent, and those present knew that nothing could undo the damage he had caused. His children, now left without a mother and with a father behind bars, were left to grapple with the devastating consequences of a crime they would never fully understand. Outside the courtroom, the reaction to Jeremy's sentencing was mixed. Some felt relief that justice had been served. Others, however, were left questioning the system that had allowed Jeremy's violent behavior to escalate unchecked for so long. Was there more that could have been done to prevent Michela's murder? Were there missed warning signs that could have alerted authorities to Jeremy's escalating aggression? These questions lingered in the air as the community tried to make sense of the tragedy. For Michela's family, the sentencing brought a measure of closure, but it did little to heal the deep wound left by her death. Michela was a loving mother, her sister said after the trial. "She didn't deserve to die like this. We will never get her back, but we hope this sentence will bring a sense of justice to her children and to everyone who loved her." The courtroom drama finally came to an end, but the story was far from over. What would the future hold for Jeremy Hinston? Would he ever come to terms with his actions, or would he remain lost in the delusions that had led him to murder his wife? And for Michela's children, how would they recover from the trauma of losing their mother and their father to such horrific violence? The answers to these questions were still unknown, but one thing was clear: the effects of this tragedy would be felt for years to come. The real question, however, remained: could anything have been done to stop it before it was too late? If you're watching this and believe that stories like Michela's deserve to be told, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Share this video to raise awareness about the warning signs of domestic violence, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think could have been done to prevent this? Your insights may help others recognize dangerous patterns in their own relationships before it's too late. Every subscription helps us continue telling the stories of victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Join our Bruised Voice community today, and help us ensure that their voices are never silenced. The grief of Michela Hinston's family has been palpable since the moment they received the news of her death. Michela was a mother of 2 sons, a dedicated bus driver for the Anderson Schools and City of Anderson Transit System. But beyond her role as a mother and worker, Michela was someone who had a strong sense of community and was known for her kind and loving nature. Her family, especially her children, have been left shattered by the brutal act that took their beloved mother and wife. Her children are young, 2 boys who have now lost their mother and their father, who is serving a 75-year prison sentence for the murder. The emotional toll on these children cannot be understated. Losing a mother in such a violent way leaves a psychological scar that will likely never heal. As they grow older, they'll have to reconcile their memories of their father and the knowledge that he took their mother's life. The silence left in their home, once filled with her warmth, will echo for years to come. The trauma of witnessing her death, whether directly or indirectly, will linger for a lifetime. The ripple effect of this crime extends far beyond the children. Michela's extended family, friends, and co-workers have also been left grappling with the horror of what happened. As they try to process the events, the realization that they never saw the signs, that they never knew what was truly happening behind closed doors, haunts them all. Despite the devastation, Michela's family has banded together to advocate for justice and change. They've spoken out, urging for more awareness surrounding domestic violence and the importance of early intervention. They are determined not to let her death be in vain and to ensure that others do not experience the same heartbreak. Michela's case quickly gained media attention as details about her tragic death began to emerge. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that captured the public's attention. It was the realization that this could happen to anyone. The case brought domestic violence into the spotlight and raised questions about how often we ignore the warning signs in our own lives. The media questioned why the system failed to intervene sooner. Despite multiple reports from Michela about Jeremy's aggressive behavior, threats, and violence, the intervention came too late. There were calls from the public and experts alike about the need for stronger laws to protect victims of domestic violence and to address the mental health issues that often go untreated until it's too late. Fundraisers were quickly organized to support Michela's children. The community rallied around them, offering both emotional and financial support in the wake of their loss. But the media coverage didn't just focus on the victim, it also questioned the mental health system. Jeremy's history of untreated mental illness was central to the case. Many felt that his behavior, which had been escalating for years, could have been better addressed by mental health professionals. Was the failure of the system to properly manage his condition a factor in Michela's death? Could this tragedy have been prevented if Jeremy had received the care and treatment he needed? The reaction from the public has been one of shock, but also one of anger. Michela's family, along with advocates for domestic violence victims, have pointed out the gaps in the protection systems. Why were there no red flags raised when Jeremy's behavior became increasingly violent? Why was Michela left to fend for herself when she reached out for help? Why was she not given the protection she desperately needed? The public's response has been mixed, with some calling for better law enforcement involvement in domestic violence situations, while others have emphasized the need for more comprehensive mental health care. The system that was supposed to protect Michela failed her, and that failure has not gone unnoticed. Jeremy's actions, however, have led to even more speculation. Could this have been avoided? Was he already beyond help, or was there something else that pushed him over the edge? The questions still haunt those closest to Michela. As they try to make sense of the events leading up to her death, they can't help but wonder if there were any missed opportunities for intervention. Could someone have done something to stop this before it was too late? And how many more victims are there, whose cries for help go unheard until it's too late? This tragedy is a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in a seemingly ordinary home. What appeared to be a routine family life, driven by responsibilities, everyday chores, and the promise of better days, was, in fact, a volatile situation marked by unaddressed tension, ignored red flags, and a silent escalation of violence. Michela Hinston's life was cut short by the very person who should have loved and protected her. Despite the warning signs of aggression, intimidation, and control, no one intervened in time to stop the inevitable. It begs the question, what could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? Her family, friends, and even her community may have had glimpses of what was happening behind closed doors, but like so many others, they didn't know how deep the problem went. What more could have been said or done to make a difference? The system that was meant to protect her failed. Law enforcement, mental health services, and even those closest to her didn't see it coming. How could we, as a society, have acted sooner to address the signs before they turned fatal? But now we turn it over to you, our viewers. What do you think? Could Jeremy's behavior have been predicted and prevented? Was his escalating aggression something that could have been halted before it turned into murder? Did Michela have enough support, or was she left to fend for herself in a dangerous and toxic relationship? Do you recognize the signs of abuse from his behavior? Should more have been done to protect her before it escalated this far? Was the system truly at fault for failing to protect Michela, or is this a reflection of the widespread issue of ignoring domestic violence until it's too late? We all have a role to play in preventing domestic violence. By commenting, liking, and sharing this video, you raise awareness about the dangers of toxic relationships and the importance of intervening before it's too late. The more we speak out about these issues, the more we can help others recognize the signs before tragedy strikes. Don't let another life be taken in silence. Your insight can help make a difference. If you haven't subscribed to Bruised Voice yet, this is your chance to make a difference. Every subscription ensures that the voices of victims like Michela Hinston are heard, even when they can no longer speak for themselves. Our channel is dedicated to telling the stories that matter, shining a light on the darkness that so many endure in silence. Hit the subscribe button now, turn on notifications, and join our community. Stay informed, stay engaged, and help raise awareness. You must be a part of the change.